Hello, you're listening to the Art Deli Sideshow. I'm your host, Art Delinsky. Another day, another dollar, another episode about, believe it or not, fucking soda. And this time we're talking about an expose, which was all the rage on Twitter a couple of weeks back. But if you're not on there, there's a chance that you didn't even hear about this. I'm not on Twitter because it's a little bit too hardcore on there for me, and my brain gets immediately fried on there, the type of hyper propaganda and overdrive that I don't actually enjoy very much. But every once in a while someone does break a story on there, so I definitely appreciate it for that. And of course, you know, a broken clock is right at least twice a day, and that clock got to ticking a couple of weeks back when a handful of right-wingers and conservative personality types on Twitter, and one literal clown account, so shout out to you, brother, I see you, in addition to a really popular Malaysian guy that tweets a lot. I think his claim to fame is nothing notable at all. I don't know why these people get so much traction, and he doesn't even live or vote in the United States. So anyways, but he's very popular, so you can't ignore it. A handful of these people on Twitter all publicly tweeted against RFK and MAHA, which is Make America Healthy Again, against their objective of wanting to ban sugary drinks, specifically soda, from SNAP recipients, meaning that people who are on SNAP, formerly known as food stamps, won't be able to receive soda. So of course, obviously this caused a stir. Let's just listen to a quick news piece about it from News Nation.
Something peculiar happened this weekend. A handful of conservative influencers all defended Big Soda, people who make sugary drinks. They said the Make America Healthy Again movement is out of line trying to cut soda and other junk food out of SNAP benefits. Arkansas, among other states, wants to ban the use of food stamps for junk food. And you can see here all of the posts. And they're all parroting the same talking points and are oddly similar. Why? Well, former swimmer turned women's rights activist Riley Gaines let us know why. She posted on Twitter in response to this, quote, "They offered to pay me to post a big fat heck no." Robert F. Kennedy, now Secretary of Health and Human Services, thanked her. It's troubling that some companies now think they have a right to demand taxpayer money to poison our children. Podcast host, investigative reporter Nick Sorter unveiled all this on Twitter, claiming the company Influenceable is behind it all, paying MAGA influencers to post in favor of the soda companies.
This guy sounds so angry, like an angry Tucker Carlson, but I can understand his frustration. I mean, definitely, these influencers were caught. They were caught being propagandists on behalf of whoever it is that cut them a check. And in the story, it says that some of them were paid $50, some of them were paid $200. At least they're getting paid. There's a lot of influencers that are spewing propaganda for free. And I don't want to necessarily get stuck in the politics of it about SNAP and soda and what people should or shouldn't eat and all of that. It's obviously a personal choice. And when we're talking about food stamps in America, most of the people on food stamps, about 40% of the people on food stamps are indeed children. So under the age of 18, 25% of it is also military families. We're talking about seniors, students. So there isn't really a single monolith of who's hungry in America per se. I think it's a little bit disingenuous for RFK to say something like Big Soda is using taxpayer funds to poison the taxpayers. Well, Big Soda is also getting taxpayer funds for their subsidies. So, you know, let's wake that up if you really want to have the conversation. Although that's not the conversation that we're having today. Sorry about that. I really don't want to get into the politics of it all. I just wanted to kind of paint a wider picture in this conversation that's missing. And like I mentioned, a lot of these influencers were getting paid. They're getting a check. And I get on this. We're starting a recession, honey. I get it. But also, what does that mean about influencers as propagandists? What does it mean as influencers who are just trying to, you know, we've seen it before. Either they're trying to just get engagement or either they're diehard ideologues. And honestly, at this point, it's kind of hard for me personally to tell the difference. But this is something that millions of people are influenced by. A lot of these tweets and a lot of these posts, they get millions of impressions and they create the news. They create a whole news cycle. And so to answer some of these questions that this story kind of percolated in my mind, I am turning to the pages of a book that I'm reading right now by Jacques Ellul, who's French. And this book is from, I think I have the 65 version, and it's called Propaganda, the Formation of Men's Attitude. A little bit about Ellul. He is a Christian anarchist. He was a professor, studied sociology, a lay theologian, philosopher, professor, and just overall really interesting, fascinating guy. We're going to be reading some of these pages, and I really think that they're going to help us kind of think about these influencers and propaganda in a way that's a little bit more critical. And the fact that this book is from the 60s is even more fascinating because we can see how all of these ideas have evolved over the last 50 plus years. So stay tuned. I'll be reading a little bit from chapter 2 titled The Conditions for the Existence of Propaganda. In this chapter, Ellul covers how and why propaganda exists. He talks a little bit about who is susceptible to it, who is not, how to fight it, and really what it needs to function. And it's just really interesting to hear his analysis about how the more technology we have, the more propaganda that we're exposed to, because technology and the advancement of technology and propaganda go hand in hand. Very fascinating stuff. I'll probably be reading a lot more from this book throughout different episodes because it's relevant. In this section, he finishes talking about mass groups and mass society versus individualistic societies and which one is more susceptible to propaganda. In his opinion, larger mass groups are more susceptible to propaganda as opposed to individual or smaller groups like, let's say, families or local communities, small local communities. So the section that I'll be reading from is titled The Mass Media of Communication. Finally, one more condition is basic for propaganda. We have just stated again that an opinion cannot form itself in entire societies unless mass media of communication exists. This much is evident. Without the mass media, there can be no modern propaganda. But we must point to a dual factor necessary if the mass media are really to become instruments of propaganda. For they are not such instruments automatically or under just any conditions. They must be subject to centralized control on one hand and well diversified with regard to their products on the other hand. Let's just stop there real quick. What he just said, I'm going to repeat that. The news media or mass communication isn't necessarily propaganda, but they can be used as instruments for it. But there is a stipulation for how that can happen. They must be subject to centralized control on one hand and well diversified with regard to their products on the other. There are 5 news conglomerates, or there are 5 big conglomerates that own all the news that we hear and see here in the States. I think that's a perfect example of that. Let's continue on. Where film productions, the press, the radio transmissions are not centrally controlled, no propaganda is possible. As long as a large number of independent news agencies, newsreels, producers, and diverse local papers function, no conscious and direct propaganda is possible. Think your local newsrooms, which are decimated at this point in America. Think of actual independent journalists, the ones who don't come with an agenda. Shout out Glenn Greenwald. That's one of my favorites. Let's continue on. This is not because the reader or the viewer has real freedom of choice, which he has not, as we shall see later, because none of the propaganda has enough power to hold the individual consistently and throughout all channels. Obviously, Ellul did not know about the For You page or social media. Local influences are sufficiently strong to neutralize the great national press. To give just one example, well, that's definitely not true anymore unless you take all of our phones away. To make the organization of propaganda possible, the media must be concentrated, the numbers of news agencies reduced, the press brought under single control, and radio and film monopolies established. Well, check, and check. The effect will be greater if the various media are concentrated in the same hands. Good morning, 5 conglomerates that own all the news channels, and hello, Jeff Bezos. When a news trust also extends its control over films and radio, propaganda can be directed at the masses, and the individual can be caught in the wide net of media. Ain't that the truth? I think we call that brain rot now. Only through concentration in a few hands of a large number of media can one attain a true orchestration, a continuity, and an application of scientific methods of influencing individuals. We're there. A state monopoly or private monopoly is equally effective. Such a situation is in the making in the United States, France, and Germany, a well-known fact. Again, this book is from the 60s, so it's kind of eerie that he called all this out. Continuing on, the number of newspapers decrease while the number of readers increase. Production costs constantly increase and necessitate greater concentration. All statistics converge on that. This concentration itself keeps accelerating, thus making the situation increasingly favorable to propaganda. Of course, one must not conclude from this that the concentration of mass media inevitably produces propaganda. Such concentration is merely a prequest for it, but that the media can be concentrated is not enough. It also is necessary that the individual will listen to them. That seems to be a truism. Why produce a propaganda paper if nobody will buy it? So this is a really interesting section. We'll continue on in a second. I just want to pause there for a minute. We talked about a couple of things here. Local newspapers and the importance of the local neutralizing the mass. So the individual being able to fight against the mass messaging, the dominant messaging of whatever it is the mass communication is trying to throw at us or at you as an individual. And then another thing that I thought was really interesting is towards the end there, why produce a propaganda paper if nobody will buy it? You know, sometimes we see things like, you know, a piece of propaganda and we say, well, why would someone lie about this? Why would someone do this? If this is fake, like, why would someone even produce this? Because someone is going to read it. Someone is going to act upon this. And when we talk again about the story, the case study that kind of percolated this episode about the right-wingers and conservative Twitter influences posting on behalf of Big Soda things that went against Make America Healthy Again, it serves as a couple of things. First of all, you know, it's hopefully he's trying to get some people on the side of the soda companies. Secondly, it creates a bit of a rift between the Make America Great Again and the Make America Healthy Again. Sorry, Make America Happy Again. Yeah, I like that. I'll get behind that platform. But it creates a rift. And also in the news article about the grift from Big Soda and the influencers, it even says they produced a picture of Trump drinking a Diet Coca-Cola because he likes that drink. And there was an instruction that was saying from the company that was contacting and doing outreach to these influencers that they should post a picture of Trump drinking Coca-Cola because it will invoke an emotional reaction to the readers, like the people who are following these influencers. We are also actively following these people. Not me necessarily, maybe not you, but we as a collective, as the mass communications, they wouldn't be creating this content. No one would be doing outreach to them and cutting them a check to lie to the masses if they had no one to lie to, if they did not have a following, but they do. There would be no propaganda if there wasn't a propagandee. Now let's continue on a little bit. This is actually where it gets good. Buying a paper, going to the movies are an important acts in an individual's life. He does them easily. But reception must be equally asserted by radio or TV. Here we encounter the problem of distributing sets. Here the propagandee must take a positive step. He must buy a set. Only where enough sets are installed can propaganda be effective. So let's convert that real quick to social media. If a social media platform didn't have a lot of users, then there wouldn't be propaganda on it. And then when you look at an individual influencer, it's the same thing. If they didn't have a large following, then people wouldn't be asking them to share propaganda. Let's get back to the book. Obviously, where there are not enough TV sets in use, it makes no sense to conduct propaganda via TV. This happened in the 1950s to the TV propaganda of the Voice of America when they beamed into some communist countries. But the act of acquiring a set brings up a point that we will discuss at considerable length. The complicity of the propagandee. Okay? Not victim shaming, we're just thinking. If he is a propagandee, it's because he wants to be. For he is ready to buy a paper, go to the movies, pay for a radio or TV set. Of course, he does not buy these in order to be propagandized. His motivations are more complex. But in doing these things, he must know that he opens the door to propaganda, that he must subject himself to it. Where he is conscious of this, the attraction of owning a radio is so much greater than the fear of propaganda that he voluntarily agrees to receiving propaganda. Reminds us a little bit of those term and conditions that we kind of just gloss right over whenever we download an app and say, well, screw this, I want to play on the app. And if it's not the terms and conditions, it's us knowing that, well, I want to download this app, even though I heard that it pulls all the information you have out of your phone and into a foreign government that is considered a hostile government to the one where you're living, aka TikTok in China, which, by the way, did you know that TikTok isn't even allowed in China? Or that time when TikTok was banned and everyone was on Red Note, which really, guys, really? Like, at this point, I agree with Ellul when he says, at this point, you want to be propagandized. But let's continue with that train of thought. If people get on something like Twitter or TikTok or something, and they know that there's a possibility that they will interact with some propaganda, or maybe they don't know, but I'm telling you, there's 110% chance that you will interact with some propaganda. Depending on the app, it's going to either be really hardcore or a little bit more sophisticated. Why do people get on social media if they know that there is a possibility of this happening? Well, for a lot of different reasons. Let's say, for example, you want to keep up with your friends, which I know I've been on social media for decades now, and I remember people saying, oh, there's so much horrible stuff on Facebook, but it's a way that I keep up with my friends and families. Oh, I want to get rid of my social media, but it's the only way that I can keep up with people I met in college or high school and stuff like that. So it works as a way of communication. That's a good part of that communication, is that you can stay in touch with people. And also it's a double-edged sword. Once an app becomes popular enough, it will become a battlefield for propaganda. And also, the fact that people can monetize off of their social media accounts, I think, is something that is definitely helpful, but also we want to also look at it a little bit more critically. And in my opinion, I think that there's something very sinister about the fact that people can make money off of social media. But let's continue on. This is even more true where transmission is by collective receiving sets, as in communist countries. The hearers gather even though they know what they're going to hear is necessarily propaganda, but they cannot escape the attraction of the radio or the hypnotism of TV. The fact is even more striking with regards to the newspapers, for the reader buys a paper he likes, a paper in which he finds his own opinions and ideas well reflected. This is the only paper he wants, so that one can say he really wants to be propagandized. He wants to submit to this influence and actually exercise his choice in the direction of the propaganda he wishes to receive. If by chance he finds his newspaper an article he dislikes or an opinion that deviates even a little from his own, he cancels his subscription. He cannot stand anything that does not run on his rails. This is the very mentality of the propagandee, as we shall see. 1962, or Ellul already talking about being canceled. Isn't that true? You have someone, let's say social media influencers, and I saw this so much, especially in 2023 after October 7th, where you had influencers, let's say they're influencers and they knit, right? All of a sudden, you have all these people in their comments talking about, why aren't you talking about Palestine? Why aren't you talking about Palestine? You're submitting to genocide. You're a white supremacist, blah, blah, blah. People are getting canceled left and right. Influencers that have nothing to do with politics, that don't give any kind of opinions or commentary or anything in relation to foreign policy, Israel, Palestine, anything that has to, nothing. We're talking about people from knitters to food influencers, people that have nothing to do with this. But because the brain-rotted following that they've created, that they have, and it's not that they created, it's social media, the milieu of conditions in social media have rotted our brains to the point that if we have someone that we follow and they deviate from our own opinions, then we instantly cancel them. And that's the mentality of people who have been propagandized so bad that they can't even see it. It's fascinating, really. Let's just go over this again. This is the only newspaper he wants, so that one can say he really wants to be propagandized. He wants to submit to this influence and actually exercise his choice in the direction of the propaganda he wishes to receive. That sounds a little bit like go do the work, right? Back in 2020, 2021, 2023, when everyone was telling us to go to the work. BIPOC people don't need to tell you how to not be racist or whatever. Go to the work. That's exactly what that sounds like to me. Let's continue on. Let no one say, quote, this reader does not submit to propaganda, First, he has such and such ideas and opinions, and then he buys a newspaper that corresponds to them. Such is an argument that is simplistic, removed from reality, and based on liberal idealism. In reality, propaganda is at work here, for what is involved is a progression from vague, diffused opinion on the part of the reader to rigorous, exciting, active expression of that opinion. You've been radicalized, buddy. That's what that means. A feeling or an impression is transformed into a motive for action. Get you riled up enough to go to the streets. Confused thoughts are crystallized. Sounds like that white guilt, huh? That white guilt turned into white privilege, into white fragility, into white rage. Myths and the reader's conditioned reflexes are enforced if he reads that newspaper. All this is characteristic of propaganda. The reader is really subject to propaganda, even though it be propaganda of his choice. I want to talk about this one real quick because I see a lot of this happening in real life and social media. And in my opinion, social media is a type of funhouse mirror that's distorting what's happening in real life, and it gives us a reflection of something that's different than reality. But let's say racism, for example. Let's say there's a person and they're walking down the street and someone calls them the N-word, and boom, racism happened. They have to deal with the racism. Yes, racism exists, and that definitely exists. But then with propagandists, it goes from a person had an interaction with a stranger that they don't know and they call them the N-word. Now all of a sudden, if you don't go down the rabbit hole of propaganda, you'll reach, well, that's because you're black, and actually anti-blackness is the fertilizer that grows the earth. Well, you might as well just shoot yourself in the face because there's no point of you ever living because everyone is always going to be a jerk to you. Or you get to the conversations around systemic racism and how all of America is built on racism. Well, historically, sure, yes, definitely. But now, if let's say I walk down the street and someone calls me the N-word and then punches me in the face, systemically, I can sue them, and systemically, they will go to jail for a hate crime, and systemically, they will have to pay up. Same thing with having, your civil rights violated. There is a systemic response to racism done by individuals on a systemic level. But if you want to use your personal narrative, this is where personal story and personal experience comes in, where you can say, yes, I have been subjected to, running with this example, let's say you were subjected to racism. Now, your experience can be and will be manipulated for a greater cause, for a greater narrative, for some sort of propaganda. So you have to watch out, because I think that it's really easy to fall into these traps. Let's say even another one that I see all the time, women. Oh, women are second-class citizens, or women are in danger from men. If I had to pick between a man and a bear, I'll pick the bear. Well, you've been propagandized. That's why you're going to pick a bear. You're going to pick a bear? Get the hell out of here, dude. You don't know what you're talking about. Obviously, you've never met not a man and not a bear, because what the hell are you talking about? Anyways, my point is, using your personal experiences of experiencing bigotry or experiencing something negative or experiencing, for example, wanting to get health insurance and having to deal with the American health system, all of these are reasonable, honest grievances that people have. Heck, Middle America has some of the most reasonable grievances I've ever heard, and yet somehow they get painted as white supremacists that all voted for Trump because they hate and want to kill all black women, So our personal grievances as individuals, not collectives, are then turned into collective grievances and then weaponized against one another. And it's actually pretty gross. But let's continue reading. We're almost done. Why always fall into this error of seeing in propaganda nothing but a device to change opinion? Propaganda is also a mean of reinforcing opinions, of transforming them into action. The reader himself offers his throat to the knife of the propaganda he chooses. Yes, we talked about this last episode about the propaganda, agitprop to propaganda pipeline. They get you angry about something, then they give you a bunch of mishmash, dumb science, propaganda science, Nazi science, and then they want you to go out to the street and refer to that propaganda or science or studies or whatever that they created to enforce that anger, to reinforce those ideas, to crystallize those half-baked ideas that you have in your head from your personal experiences, and then generalize them, and then create a false narrative that you can then dress onto the world and into reality, where it's not real, buddy. None of it is real. Continuing on, we're almost finished, by the way. We have said that no propaganda can exist unless a mass can be reached and set into motion. Yet that particular and remarkable fact is that the mass media really create their own public. The propagandists need no longer beat the drum to lead the parade in order to establish a following. This happens all by itself through the effects of the communication media. They have their own power to attract and act on individuals in such fashion as to transform them into a collective, a public, a mass. The buying of a TV set through an individual act inserts the individual into the psychological and behavioral structure of the mass. What an amazing way to describe the last 4 to 5 years of identity politics and how it's been basically turned into confederations of people and interest groups, which is ridiculous because you cannot have interest groups based on identity politics because it's silly. Not all women think the same, not all queer people think the same, not all Black people think the same. But the job of propaganda is to turn individuals into a mass, because as a mass, it's easier to control because it's like a cult. You have to obey the cult rules, the way that you talk, the way that you dress, the things you believe in. It's creating a situation where if you don't believe, you are an outcast. If you aren't part of us, then you're against us. If you aren't a friend, you are a foe, which is again literally a Nazi political theory. And we as humans, we want to be part of something. And I'll say it, I've said it once, I'll say it again. Propaganda is so easy to distribute and to enact onto people because it's just human psychology. Continuing on. He obeys the collective motives when he buys it, and through his acts opens the door to propaganda, where this dual process of concentration of the resources of propaganda and wide diffusion of its recipients does not take place. No modern propaganda can function in a society. Okay, that's the end of that section. This part of the book makes me think of a question that you've probably heard a million times. If a tree in the forest falls and no one is there to hear it, does it make a sound? And if we substitute tree for propaganda, Ellul tells us that no. If propaganda exists but no one is there to hear it, then it doesn't make a sound. But in 2025, all you really need is 1 or 2 influencers to hear the propaganda, believe the propaganda, and then share it with their followers. And we had a real life example of that happening last week with the conservative influencers on Twitter tweeting against RFK Jr. and Make America Healthy Again on behalf of Big Soda. My name is Art Delinsky, and you've been listening to me talk about this influencer expose debacle that happened on Twitter as a jumping off point to ask some questions about influencers, propaganda, what does it mean about who we follow online, and much more. I've been using the book Propaganda by Jacques Ellul, that's Ellul, to talk about these ideas. Highly recommend checking out the book. I'll probably be reading a lot more from it in later episodes. This is the Art Deli Sideshow. I'll talk to you next time. Don't be a fool. Stay in school.